Good evening, and welcome to another edition of ShireTV. I'm Darrell W. Perry.
And I'm James Cleveland.
Newly elected state rep from Keene, Delmar Burridge, has encouraged people in the past to snitch out their neighbors and has admitted wanting to bring back the firing squad. He has proposed new legislation to ban firearms from being openly carried in any public building in New Hampshire, which of course is a direct violation of the Second Amendment. Once again, he shows his true elitist colors. Delmar made the comment to the Huffington Post, quote, "It's outrageous. I don't think public employees, people who go to college, should be subjected to this, because clearly a college education and being in a public office produce a special class of people who have earned special rights and authority over the lower class."
Delmar has also proposed legislation that would give counties the ability to impose an income tax on its residents. Unlike the gun ban, which directly violates the Second Amendment, this second proposal doesn't infringe on New Hampshire's Constitution, which allows cities and counties to regulate themselves. It does, however, violate common sense. Adding an additional tax on the already overburdened peasantry would be disastrous.
I'm opposed to both of these ideas because, first off, I'm opposed to all forms of taxation. And secondly, I believe that everyone has a right to defend themselves in whatever manner they see fit. If that means using a firearm, then, someone should be allowed to carry that weaponry on them at all times, especially when they're in these supposed gun-free zones. And we'll get into a story about the gun-free zones later in the night. But I'm very highly offended by his statement about people who go to college should not be subjected to this. Me and you have both graduated from college, and we both agree that people should be able to carry weapons to defend themselves.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting too how, as you pointed out, there's going to be a story later where there was an attempted mass shooting at someone was carrying a gun, and they could have prevented it if it had been worse. So it's always interesting how these mass shootings occur at so-called gun-free zones. And I mean, I'm sure it's happened, but I've never read, like, let's say a mass shooting at
A
a
gun
gun show
range?
would be, or a gun
Yeah,
range.
they never happen.
Yeah.
Do you know why there's no mass shootings at gun ranges or at gun shows? Because everyone is armed.
Yeah, totally. And as for the income tax proposal, that's another disastrous idea. One of the things I like about New Hampshire, it's one of the few states I know of where is no income tax, at least on the state level. And if they did it on a local and county level, that's even worse because, let's say I'm a business owner, my incentive is to move the business out of the county, let's say to a less populated area where there isn't that tax.
Right, and here in Cheshire County, Keene has one of the highest property tax rates in the state. The millage is slightly lower than a few other locations, but the property values are high enough to where when you calculate the millage based on the property value, Keene property is taxed at the highest amount of any place in New Hampshire. So imagine adding a 1% income tax, whatever income actually means, on top of already paying the highest property taxes in the state. The people of Keene are going to be even more taxed.
Yeah.
And we've seen how the Keene City Council is very anti-business with restrictive sign ordinances and the regulations stating that bars are not able to promote happy hour outside of their actual building. It's very anti-business, and this is actually going to drive more people out of Keene.
Yeah, that's an important point too. If they did pass this income tax, it's not like they're going to repeal a property tax, or lower it. So it's just going to be on top of what you're already paying.
I've never seen any place institute one tax and then take away another tax. Even if they tell you this is only temporary so that we can do away with this other tax. I don't know of any instance, and if anybody knows of an instance, I would love to have them send that information to us. They could probably put that on the Facebook page of facebook.com/ShireTV.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare. I don't know too many governments that ever reduce taxes. It's just like unheard of to me.
This past week, several local activists paid visits to 3 New England courthouses, one in Palmer, Mass., one in Concord, New Hampshire, and also in Newport. All 3 visits were met with fierce opposition as soon as the cameras started rolling. Our very own James Cleveland caught these insane interactions on video.
Are you denying me entry into a public building, to a courthouse?
Sir, the way you're acting with that camera going, turn that camera on.
I think
he's acting.
Hey,
That's his property, man.
please don't grab my camera.
I need to come in.
Hey.
They're not. Are you registered with the SJC, sir?
I'm not sure who that is, but
Okay, next time you come through this threshold, we're confiscating them, okay?
okay.
Here, I called you. They were in the hallway here, blocking entrance.
Oh, go head in.
Seriously, man. You guys need to think about how you're acting to me.
Excuse me, please move to the side.
How's it going, man?
I need you to take the drink outside. Yes, you're ready politely.
The courtroom. Okay. And they wouldn't leave. And I told him, if he comes through the door again, we have to confiscate. And I would be subject to arrest and disorder. Okay, next time you come through this threshold, we're confiscating them, okay? Okay. Quite loud, and they're blocking traffic.
Yeah, we're not going to fight. We're not going to raise our voice. You have an issue, man. You really do.
Sir,
Yes, sir.
would you please put the camera down?
Put the camera away.
I'm not inside the court building.
If you want to film, go out to the street. That's off the courthouse property. Sir, all I want you to do is, they're asking you to put the camera down.
I understand that, but
And I'm going to speak.
I'm following their sign and it says inside the courthouse. Excuse me.
Go on off the property with the camera.
I'm following your sign. It says I
Off
can't
the
be
property
inside a
with the camera.
courthouse.
Off the property. Go over there.
Property.
Over there. That's right. Over there's public property.
This is public property.
Would you say this is inside the courthouse out here? I'm following your
Why
sign.
did it change? A moment ago you said if you walk past the threshold. Now it's the.
I'm following your listing there.
Put that camera away, sir.
No cameras may be used in the lobby or other public.
Okay, you're not allowed to.
Excuse me.
Leave the
Excuse
building.
me.
Leave the building.
Man, you guys have a real problem with accountability, don't you?
Leave the building, sir.
What's the problem with having people in the public?
Are you guys recording us?
Does it say I have to leave the building?
Yes, leave the building, please.
I didn't read that on there. Can I go read it again?
Leave the building, sir.
You guys are ridiculous.
Call campus security whenever to go.
Excuse me. Okay, I'll leave. There's no problem.
Look at these people, man. You guys are like attack dogs.
You're not coming back in again.
I can't come back in if I don't have the camera?
No, leave, please.
Excuse me.
Thank you, sir. Don't block the door, sir.
I'm not blocking the door.
Step over there, please. Don't block the door.
If anyone comes, I'll let them through. I'm not blocking the door.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna ask that you put the camera away, please.
Are you just
I'm asking. You're
Okay.
allowed to have it in the courtroom. You're not allowed to photograph staff or anything else. So please put it away.
Okay, here's your copy.
All right.
Well, if
You're all set.
All right.
if you're asking, I'm gonna decline.
You're gonna decline. Okay.
Yes, sir.
There's the door.
Do I have to leave?
There's the door.
We're done.
You're
and my
declining my
right.
offer. There's the door.
Okay. I see the door. What? Do I have to leave the building?
There's
Please,
the
please
door.
don't touch my camera, sir.
I'm not touching it, but I
You're
may.
my right.
There's the door.
Do I have to leave?
Sir, there's the door.
James, you're my rock.
Do I have to leave? Is that
There's the door. I'm not going to mention it too many more times.
Are you ordering me to leave?
Sir.
You're saying there's the door.
The day is over for you, sir. Go home.
Okay.
my rock.
Have a day in court. Be happy with it.
I know you are.
Oh, are you kidding me?
What are they doing? They trying to block you?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. You all have a nice day.
Welcome back. The real question one must ask oneself is, why are cameras banned from so many courthouses across the country? Why do these public servants who supposedly work for us fear transparency? What do they have to hide?
You know, that's a very good question. What do they have to hide? And I think they want to hide their corruption and the arbitrary nature of the enforcement of the supposed rules that are in place. Here in New Hampshire, Article 8 of the New Hampshire Constitution says that government officials are at all times to be accountable to the people. And Article 22 of the New Hampshire Constitution says the liberty of the press is essential to a free society. So, based on those two statements from the New Hampshire Constitution, they should not be allowed to prohibit anyone, especially the media, from accessing the courthouse with a camera. And as we saw in Concord, there's a much longer video up on YouTube that you have on your channel, Lightspeed Liberty, where the state police actually came to Concord because I believe the bailiff told you, if you don't like our rules, call the cops. So you did, and the state troopers came out and said, well, there could be juveniles. So their arbitrary enforcement rule is because, well, there could be children. Well, you could just stand outside of a playground and film children if filming children is what you want to do.
Yeah, one thing that you can attest to, the rules are arbitrary and they change from one trial to another. Like, they basically seem to make up the rules as they go. Like, oh, in this trial we're going to allow 2 cameras, and oh, in your trial we're only going to allow 1 camera, and you can't pan the camera. And they come up with all these ridiculous rules. There's no, you have to file a notice 24 hours in advance, and then the state troopers telling me, no, it's 10 days in advance. So everyone has their own idea.
Well, and the state troopers also told you that it's a motion to the court, and it's no longer a motion to the judge. It's a notice to the judge. A motion is something that is filed, and then the judge has to take time to rule on, such as a motion to dismiss a trial or a motion to refrain from the threat of physical force to demand respect. Those are motions that must be filed beforehand. Notices are totally different.
That's
and
a great
it's basically
point.
telling the judge, hey, judge, I'm filming.
Yeah, one thing too, I was thinking, let's say that the judge decides that I'm not going to allow you to film. Like, to me, he should have a really good reason that he should even list to you why he's, not allowing, let's say, someone to film.
Right.
It's supposed to be an open governmental proceeding, and as you pointed out, the public should have the right to witness and record what happened there. So,
And you were in Massachusetts, and they asked if you had filed with the SJC, which is the State Judicial Commission. And, of course, you had not, and you stated you weren't even sure what that was.
yeah,
Ian Freeman, a friend of ours who's the talk show host on Free Talk Live, has a trial coming up next month down in Palmer. And you guys were actually down there for his pre-trial. I have filed my publishing company with the SJC so that now anytime I need to or want to attend a court hearing in Massachusetts, I will be able to take cameras in as long as I have this piece of paper saying that I have their permission to be the media. And New Hampshire is implementing a similar thing, although the one in New Hampshire is voluntary as of now. But, of course, as we know with all government things, anything that starts off voluntary becomes mandatory. So, in not too long, the freedom of the press will be stifled even further here in New Hampshire, unless, of course, you file some papers to basically request their permission.
Yeah, and there's nothing stopping them from attaching a fee to this request or anything like that. So that could be another stifling of the freedom of the press. Moving on, the federal government is nearing the edge of the so-called fiscal cliff, the term used to describe the simultaneous expiration of tax cuts, the increase in tax rates, and supposedly massive spending cuts. Some argue that by allowing the federal budget to be cut by $500 billion across the board will send the economy into another recession, and that this must be prevented. Others, like Frank Shostak, argue that a cut in government outlays is actually going to be good news to wealth generators. It is, however, going to be bad news for the various non-productive activities that emerged on the backs of increases in government outlays.
One proposal for avoiding the fiscal cliff is for the U.S. Mint to produce 2 or more platinum coins with the face value of $1 trillion each. This is an actual proposal by Joseph Gagnon of the Peterson Institute for International Economics. Gagnon, though, is not the first person to mention this insane idea. During the 2011 showdown over the debt ceiling, Yale Law School professor Jack Balkin proposed the idea, as did Cullen Roche from Pragmatic Capitalism. The Washington Post describes the scenario this way. The U.S. Mint would produce, say, a pair of trillion-dollar platinum coins. The president orders the coins to be deposited at the Federal Reserve. The Fed then moves this money into the Treasury's account, and just like that, the Treasury suddenly has an extra $2 trillion to pay off its obligations for the next 2 years without the need to issue new debt. The ceiling is no longer an issue.
Gagnon claims there's nothing obviously economically problematic about it because the government would simply be using the money to keep spending at existing levels. So it wouldn't create any extra inflation. Though if it did cause problem, Gagnon says, the Fed could always counteract the effects by winding down some of its other programs to inject money into the economy. Injecting money into the economy to solve the problems created by injecting money into the economy makes about as much sense as putting more water into a sinking boat to keep the boat from sinking.
You know, that's the reason the Titanic sank, is because there wasn't enough water. Or at least that's using the Keynesian logic of, oh, there's this housing bubble, we need to inject more money into housing. Or, oh, there's this college loan bubble, so we need to just throw more money at college loans and make college even more expensive than it is. Or, oh, we have a $16 trillion debt. I have an idea. Let's make up these coins and say that this is the new debt. But my question is, why stop at 2 coins that are worth $1 trillion? Why not issue 18 coins that are worth $1 trillion each? Then you totally wipe out the national debt and still have $2 trillion extra dollars.
Yeah, it's not, I guess people need to understand when they create money, it's not real prosperity. I mean, it's not like people sacrificed and saved for this new money. They just put it in on their balance sheet and then they can spend the money. I mean, that's going to cause massive inflation if they did that.
But that's real money though, right? Because they said that it's money and they put this little stamp on it and it came from a government agency, so it has to be real money.
Yeah, that's one of the problems with, I guess, fiat money laws where, I guess some people call them legal tender, like you must accept U.S. dollars in forms of payment, you know.
For all debts, public and private, according to what it says on the papers.
Yeah, I mean, there's no choice to be able to say, well, I don't like the dollar, I'd rather accept something else. If I have dollars, my understanding, maybe you can comment, a business must accept dollars, like if you're buying services or products for them, right?
Well, it's one of those things as with taxation. They say that you must pay your taxes. You don't have to do it.
That is true.
But there are consequences if you do not. I don't see any business staying in business too long if they did refuse to accept the Federal Reserve notes that are called U.S. dollars.
Yeah, one thing too, I think if we had a stable money supply, prices would fall as, let's say, things became more productive. Like, let's say a factory opened and it could produce bread at a cheaper price. Everything would fall, and so your savings that you did had, you'd actually become wealthier. If you save money now, you lose purchasing power.
Well, one thing with your hypothetical bread company is, as long as there are the price controls and subsidies to various farmers, it doesn't matter how efficient the bread company is, and it doesn't matter how stable the money is. As long as there are the artificial controls of basically price manipulation, then prices will continue to climb. This past week has seen the second deadliest school shooting in this nation's history. Our hearts go out to all the victims and their families. It should be noted, however, that there was another public shooting last week at the Clackamas Town Center Mall in Oregon that received very little media attention at all. 2 were killed and 1 injured before the shooter turned the weapon on himself. More than likely, the death toll would have been far greater if it weren't for the presence of 1 armed civilian, an untold hero from this fatal day.
Now to an untold story on the shooting at Clackamas Town Center. We now know there was another armed man in the mall that day, a shopper who had the shooter in his gun sight, but never pulled the trigger. The night team's Mike Benner is live outside the mall. And Mike, the big question for many tonight would be, why didn't he shoot?
And Tracy, he understands that is a question a lot of people will be asking tonight. But Nick Mealy tells us he did not shoot because he was afraid he would injure or kill an innocent person running for safety. Nick Mealy is emotionally drained. The 22-year-old was at the Clackamas Town Center with a friend and her 4-month-old baby when a masked gunman opened fire.
I heard 3 shots and I turned and looked at Casey and I go, are you fucking serious? And she looks at me and she goes, yeah.
As the friend and baby hit the floor, Mealy, who has a concealed carry permit, positioned himself behind a pillar.
He was working on his rifle and he kept pulling the charging handle and hitting the side.
The break and gunfire allowed Mealy to pull out his own gun, a Glock 22, but he never took his eyes off the shooter.
In my mind, I kept saying, like, drop it, drop the gun, you know. And when I drew up, I got tunnel vision, and all I saw was my front sight on his head, and I was indexing, and as I was going down, I was going to pull. I saw someone in the back of the Charlotte move, and I knew that if I fired and missed, I could end up hitting them.
So Mealy took cover inside a nearby store. He never did pull the trigger, and he stands by that decision.
I'm not beating myself up because I didn't shoot him, but I know that after he saw me, I think the last shot he fired was the one that he used on himself.
The gunman was dead, but not before taking 2 innocent lives with him, and as Mealy points out, taking the innocence of everyone else.
I don't ever want to have to see anyone that way ever. It bothers me, you know.
It just so happens that Nick Mealy is a former security guard at this mall of all places. He left in August for another security job. He tells us his ultimate goal is law enforcement. Back to you.
What a tough decision he had to make in a split second. Mike Benner, thank you.
Yeah, one really interesting point I found from that video, if you listen to some people, they say like, oh, if you have armed people, it's going to be like the Wild West. Everyone's going to open fire. But the gentleman who was carrying and did draw his weapon, he was reluctant to shoot because he didn't want to injure any innocent people.
Right. And something else, the Wild West was not as wild as the television shows and the movies make you believe, because everyone was armed, and an armed society is a polite society, or at least that's the cliche. And here in New Hampshire, it's pretty much proven that an armed society is a polite society, because there are less violent crimes in New Hampshire than there are in most of the other states. There are far greater, to a lesser extent, there are less murders here in New Hampshire than there are in other places. The city that I came from is about 2.5 times the size of Manchester and regularly has close to 100 murders a year. The entire state of New Hampshire has less than a dozen a year.
Wow.
Consistently. I believe there were 8 murders in all of 2011.
Yeah, another thing, there's been a proposal by Bradley Jardis, he was a former law enforcement officer, to, if the teachers wanted it, they could have the ability to be armed as a check on, let's say, a school shooter. So it may not prevent, let's say, someone from shooting, but at least in theory, if he tried to go to the next classroom, someone could be waiting for him with the gun. So, like, I think that's an excellent proposal.
I like that proposal, and depending on how the proposal is actually made would determine whether or not I would actually advocate for its passage. If it were done in a way similar to the way the FAA has basically allowed some pilots to be armed, then I would probably support it. I wish the FAA would allow more pilots to be armed, because the way it is now, I think it's only 10% of pilots, and there's extensive training that they must go through. And I do agree, if you're going to be in such a scenario and then have the government's blessing on, you know, basically being able to defend people, there should be some form of training. Although I don't agree with a lot of the ways, especially with government-run schools. I don't believe that government should run schools. I don't believe that government should run buildings. So I believe that free people should be able to defend themselves in whatever manner they see fit, whether that be a teacher defending herself and her children or just someone defending themselves.
Yeah, and that's a good point. If we had private schools, they could come up with their own security programs and procedures to help prevent this. On that note, thank you for tuning in. I'm James Cleveland.
And I'm Daryl W. Perry. Join us again next week for another edition of ShireTV for more news and analysis.
May each find happiness, peace, and prosperity.